Obinna had lived in room 7 of Block C Oduyemi compound in Ajagunle for over 5 years, and not once had he been this broke. The kind of broke that made you stare at your last cup of Gary like it owed you money. The kind that made you wish the wind would carry the scent of jollof rice from your neighbor's pot to fill your stomach instead. Business at his roadside electronics repair kiosk had dried up like fish left in the sun. He still sat there daily, hunched over busted radios, phone chargers, and cassette players older than some of the children in the compound. But the customers? They came few and far between, and the ones who came acted like promises were currency. "Bros, I go come back next week, I swear." But next week became next month, and next month turned into silence. The worst part wasn't even the hunger or the empty wallet. It was the shame. Obinna was a man of pride. His father, a retired postmaster from Owerri, had raised him to believe that a man's name was his biggest inheritance. "Never let them say you're owing," his father would say, tapping the Bible with a leathery finger. But now here he was, 3 months behind on rent and lying through his teeth every time the landlord asked. At night, he would lie on his thin mattress, eyes fixed on the cracked ceiling, and whisper to the silence, "Just one breakthrough, Lord. Just one." But the silence never replied. Pa Yakubu, the landlord, was not a man known for kindness. In fact, he was known for the opposite. With his potbelly that jiggled when he coughed and his habit of walking shirtless around the compound with a toothpick permanently hanging from his lip, he had become a local legend of sorts. The type of legend you hoped never made eye contact with you. He lived in the self-contained front flat and behaved like he ruled a small kingdom. He commented on everyone's visitors, everyone's cooking, even the smell of your bathing soap if you left your door open. He had once removed a roof tile from a tenant's room in the rainy season, simply because the man owed 2 months' rent and had been pretending not to be home. Obinna knew he was running out of time. The whispers had already begun. Mama Ranty, who sold Puff Puff at the corner, had mentioned casually, "Obinna de struggle o, a don slim well. Musa, the neighbor who fixed bicycles and shared his wall, had stopped asking about rent altogether, probably to avoid being dragged into the drama when it exploded. And the children? They sensed something too. Children always knew when an adult's spirit was low. They no longer greeted him with laughter, but with pitying eyes and cautious giggles. Still, Obinna kept hoping. A customer had promised to return for an expensive repair job. "Just fix Am. I go settle you. No worry." If that job went through, he could pay Pa Yakubu everything in one go. That thought became his daily prayer. It gave him enough courage to nod respectfully when the landlord passed and said, "Obinna, are you turning my compound into a charity organization?" Obinna would smile. "No, sir. Soon, sir." But inside, his chest would tighten. On a particularly dry Tuesday morning, Obinna skipped breakfast entirely. Not because he was fasting, but because there was nothing left to fast from. He walked to his kiosk with the broken radio from the previous day and tried to stay busy. The streets of Ajagunle were already alive with noise. Hawkers shouting prices, children in oversized uniforms rushing to school, Danfo buses honking like angry goats. But inside him, there was only stillness. Hunger and worry had made his spirit quiet. By afternoon, a drizzle began to fall, light and persistent. Obinna stood outside his stall, staring at the gray clouds and letting the water tap gently on his bare arms. That's when his phone rang. It was Musa. "Guy, where you dey?" Musa's voice was low but tense. "Kiosk. Weddin' happen?" "Your matter, Don cast. Pa Yakubu Don bring carpenter." Obinna's stomach sank. "Carpenter? For weddin'?" "For your door, oh. Him talk say today him go teach lesson." Obinna froze. "You dey serious?" "I swear. Dem don dey unbolt the hinges already. I say make I call you before everything finish." The world spun for a second. Obina dropped the radio he was holding and didn't even notice when it hit the floor. He grabbed his phone and rushed into the street, feet slapping muddy puddles, heart thudding like a talking drum. He knew Pa Yakubu was serious. The man didn't make empty threats. And Obina could already imagine it. His private world opened to the street, his shame hanging like laundry for everyone to see. When he reached the compound, his worst fears greeted him. Two sweaty men in singlets and torn jeans were crouched by his door. One was unscrewing the hinges with an old screwdriver. The other had already removed the top bolt and was prying loose the second one. Behind them stood Pa Yakubu, arms crossed, belly out, chewing his signature toothpick like it owed him rent too. Around him, the compound had gathered. Some adults stood with hands on hips. Others leaned on walls pretending to scroll their phones. But all of them were watching. Watching Obina. The landlord smiled without warmth. "Ah, Obina, welcome back. I help you open door since you no fit open wallet." "Baba landlord, a beg. No beg me. I beg you for 3 months. Now I beg myself." He turned to the carpenters. "Make sure you no scratch my wall." The door gave way with a soft groan, like it too had grown tired of standing between Obina and shame. They carried it like a coffin and leaned it against the wall near the landlord's unit. And just like that, room 7 was naked. The small mattress, with the yellowed bedsheet, the cracked wall mirror, the half bag of Gary in the corner. Everything was now public. Children giggled. Mama Ranty clapped a hand over her mouth, pretending to be shocked. "Kai, this man no dey pity person at all." But her voice was too loud. Loud enough for everyone to hear. Obina stood there, not knowing whether to cry, scream, or just vanish into thin air. He could already feel the mosquitoes sharpening their needles. He could already see himself trying to sleep, while strangers peeked in like he was a zoo animal. He didn't speak. He just walked slowly to his mattress, sat down, and stared at the compound wall. The humiliation had only just begun, and as the rain picked up again, mixing with the smell of dust and hot concrete, Obina knew one thing for sure. He would never forget this day. But what Pa Yakubu didn't know was that Obina wasn't done yet. In the silence of that humiliation, a storm was beginning to stir. And storms, as everyone knows, always start quietly. The first night without a door was far worse than Obina imagined. He had tried to hang a faded wrapper across the entrance with thumbtacks and bits of old masking tape, but the wind didn't respect suffering. It flapped the cloth like a frustrated bird, revealing his room again and again like a stage play where he was the unwilling lead. Every creak of a lizard on the wall made him sit up, startled. Every mosquito that flew in through the opening bit with a vengeance, as if it had heard the landlord's laughter and come to join in. Sleep came in broken shivers, and when it did, it brought only dreams of people pointing and laughing. By morning, Obina looked like a man who had just returned from a war he lost. The sun was barely up when the compound came alive. It always did. In places like Oduyemi Compound, where walls were thin and lives were loud, no one needed an alarm clock. Babies wailed. Kerosene stoves hissed. Buckets clanked on the cement floors as women fetched water. And then came the whispers. "Aya. See, Obina, him still they like that. He suppose go beg landlord, small humility no they kill person. A beg, make he carry that wrapper come not only him get shame." Children gathered outside his room like curious visitors at a zoo. One bold little girl, Joy, even asked, "Uncle Bina, why your room no get door? Did somebody steal it?" The adults laughed, trying to mask their amusement behind fake sympathy. Obina wanted to vanish, but he didn't. Instead, he stood up, brushed his teeth outside like nothing was wrong, and walked to the well to fetch water. It was the only act of defiance he could afford. Mama Ranty was already there, tying her wrapper tighter around her wide hips and gossiping like it was a paid job. As Obina approached, she tilted her head with mock concern. Obina, you didn't sleep well, Abi? These mosquitoes no get mercy." He forced a smile and nodded, but she continued, loud enough for half the compound to hear. "This landlord, Seth? Him wahala don too much. But my pekin, next time just pay your rent before." He reached this cayenne embarrassment. That last part stung. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was. By the time he returned to his room, someone had drawn a smiley face on the cloth he'd hung as a makeshift door. Probably the neighbor's teenage son. Obina didn't bother to wipe it off. He just lifted the cloth and went inside. The next few days followed a cruel routine. Neighbors passed by slower than usual, always pretending to look elsewhere, yet clearly taking in the scene. His torn bedsheet, his cracked fan, the polythene, bags stuffed with second-hand clothes, the basin of water at the corner. At night, the compound became a jungle. With no door to protect him, all kinds of creatures claimed his space. Cockroaches marched proudly across the floor like soldiers on patrol. One night, a stray cat snuck in, sniffed his leftover Gary, and urinated on the corner rug before sauntering out like it owned the place. On another night, two drunkards passing by poked their heads through the cloth and yelled, "Guy, no open bar you dey run here?" Obina didn't reply. He was saving his strength. Even Musa, his closest friend and neighbor, struggled to comfort him. At first, Musa tried cracking jokes to lighten the mood. "Guy, make them come, they pay you ticket for viewing. You dey run theater." Obina chuckled weakly. But after 3 days of the same humiliation, even Musa's jokes dried up. The compound kids had turned his room into a tourist attraction. They played a game called Guess Obina's Next Emotion. One would peek into the room and shout, "He's frowning!" Another would giggle, "He's sleeping again!" And they'd all run away squealing. The worst part was how people changed how they talked to him. Not with hatred, not with kindness, but with pity. That deep, heavy pity that wraps around your neck like a wet towel and squeezes the last of your pride. People started offering him food he didn't ask for. Mama. Tenny dropped half a loaf of bread by his room, whispering, "Just manage, my son." A teenage girl left him 2 sachets of pure water like he was a beggar. It broke something inside him. He wasn't just broke anymore, he was being erased. And still, the door sat by the landlord's flat, proudly displayed like a hunter's trophy. Pa Yakubu passed by it every morning, toothpick in mouth, humming gospel tunes like a holy man, as if he hadn't destroyed someone's dignity with a single petty act. "Obina, how market?" he would say with a smirk. Obina would nod in silence. But one evening, everything changed. He sat outside on the corridor, resting his back against the warm cement wall, trying to ignore the goats that had begun nibbling at his curtain, when Musa appeared beside him holding 2 bottles of Maltina. "No worry," Musa said, opening one. "I get gist for you." Obina took the bottle wordlessly. Musa leaned close and whispered like a man revealing buried treasure. "Pa Yakubu Day plan landlord meeting for this weekend. Big men go come, chairman from other compounds, even one Chief Seth go show." Obina's eyes flickered. For here, for this same compound, he want impress dem. "You know say he too dey form landlord association chairman." Obina sipped quietly, then nodded. And for the first time in days, he smiled. Not because the shame was over, but because he finally saw a crack in the armor. Musa looked at him curiously. "Why you smile?" Obina's voice was quiet. "Because fresh air they benefit everybody. He go reach everybody." That night, Obina didn't cover his room. He let the mosquitoes come, let the cats roam, let the neighbors stare. Because deep inside, something had changed. His shame was no longer a weight to carry. It had become a tool, and very soon, Pa Yakubu would understand what it means to open someone's life to the public. Because Obina was about to do the same, and when he did, it wouldn't just be a door that disappeared. It would be a reputation, and in Ajagunle, a man's reputation was more valuable than rent. Obina had learned something about humiliation. It either breaks a man or sharpens him. After days of swallowing shame like bitter leaf, of smiling at neighbors who mocked him in whispers, of sleeping in a room exposed to mosquitoes, animals, and judgmental glances, Obina had reached his limit. But instead of exploding, he became quieter. His silence wasn't defeat, it was calculation. He stopped protesting. Stopped trying to fix the flapping cloth that no longer passed for privacy. He didn't argue when passers-by poked their heads in. He even stopped replying when people asked him, "Guy, you never get your door back?" Instead, he nodded slowly, murmured "soon," and carried on with his day. But every minute, his mind worked like a soldering iron, heating a plan into shape. He spent hours watching Pa Yakubu. The landlord had returned to his usual routine of parading the compound shirtless, barking orders at his sons, laughing with Mama Ranti, and bragging about the upcoming landlord meeting like he was preparing to host a state governor. Obina noticed the little things. How the man always left his front door wide open on Saturdays to air the parlor. How he sent his teenage son Jamiu on errands to the next street when preparing for visitors. How he liked to buy chilled drinks from Alhaja's shop just before any gathering. That's when it hit Obina. The door. The irony was too beautiful. What better way to respond to the humiliation of being stripped of your privacy than by stripping the very man who did it? Musa was the first person he shared the idea with. One humid evening when both of them sat under the mango tree near the compound gate, pretending to play Ludo while observing life unfold around them. "I want to remove his door," Obina said quietly, almost like a man confessing a crime. Musa blinked. "Which door?" "His own. The landlord's." Musa dropped the dice and stared. "You want enter jail?" But Obina didn't flinch. "No be stealing, na awareness campaign." Musa stared longer, then slowly his mouth twisted into a grin. "Guy, this one fit enter compound history." Obina chuckled softly. "Let fresh air touch his parlor too. Good for everybody." They planned it carefully. Obina would wait until the morning of the meeting, when Pa Yakubu was out buying drinks and chin-chin. Musa would keep watch near the gate. Obina would act fast, using a borrowed screwdriver to loosen the door hinges, just like the landlord had done to him. But this time, they wouldn't hide the door. No. They would display it. They'd carry it into the center of the compound, prop it up for all to see, and hang a cardboard sign that would drive the message straight into the landlord's ego. It wasn't violence. It wasn't revenge. It was dignity, served poetic in public. That Friday evening, Obina borrowed a tool set from Bamidel, the roadside furniture apprentice. "I just want fix small hinge for my window," he said, smiling. Bamidel didn't ask questions. In Ajagunle, everyone minds their business as long as you mind yours. Obina took the tools and hid them under his bed. That night, he slept well. For the first time in weeks, he dreamt not of laughter or pity but of silence, a silence where Pa Yakubu's voice had been silenced. By dawn on Saturday, the entire compound was buzzing. Jamiu swept the corridor 3 times. The younger boys fetched water and wiped down every plastic chair Pa Yakubu owned, setting them in neat rows under the veranda. The landlord himself was pacing around, issuing instructions like a general preparing for war. "Make sure the palm wine pot no get crack-o. Wipe that window well. And a beg, sweep those goat droppings near the—" "Gotta!" Obina watched him from a distance, smiling politely whenever their eyes met. "Good morning, Baba Landlord," he said sweetly. "Ah, Obina, my boy. Fresh air day help you now, Abi?" Pa Yakubu laughed, shaking his belly. Obina bowed his head. "Yes, sir. I dey think better these days." The landlord clapped him on the back like a proud uncle. "Good. Maybe you go find sense now. Try pay me small, I go forget the rest." Obina nodded. "I hear you, sir. Nagad de help, man." At exactly 10:35 a.m., Pa Yakubu stepped out to the street, heading toward Al-Hajjah's shop to collect his drinks and meat pie order. Obina waited 2 minutes, then stood. Musa was all ready, watching from the corner, pretending to untangle his bicycle chain. He gave the signal, a low whistle. Obina entered action mode. He walked quickly but calmly to the landlord's front door, glanced left and right, and knelt beside the hinges. The screwdriver slipped into place like a memory. In seconds, the first screw was out. Then the second. Within 6 minutes, he had removed all 3 hinges. Musa helped him gently lift the door. They carried it together to the middle of the compound, like a sacrifice for the gods. Obina placed it down, leaned it against the well wall, and pulled out. The final item, a large piece of cardboard on which he had written in thick black marker, "Door looking for rent, owner too proud to pay." Musa clapped softly. The sign was bold. Unapologetic? Perfect. They stepped back, hands on hips, staring at the work like artists admiring their masterpiece. Then they walked away. Obina sat in front of his room, picked up his screwdriver again, and began tightening an already tight screw on his wall just to look busy. Musa fetched a cold sachet of water and slurped it loudly, pretending nothing had happened. The first guest arrived at 11:05 a.m. A tall man in a sky-blue caftan and dark sunglasses. He paused at the gate, stared at the door, and frowned. "What is the meaning of this?" More guests followed. Each one slowed, read the sign, then stared toward the open space where Pa Yakubu's front door used to be. The landlord's sitting room was now fully visible. Mismatched chairs, worn rug, a fan that made more noise than wind. The illusion of importance was already cracking, but the real explosion came at 11:30 a.m. Pa Yakubu returned. Holding a crate of bottled drinks and a nylon of puff-puff, he walked into the compound with the swagger of a man about to impress. Then, he saw it, his door, his sign, his shame. He stopped cold. Sweat instantly drenched his forehead, though the sun had barely peaked. Who did this? Who removed my door? No one answered. Musa looked up from his bicycle like he was solving a math equation. Obina stood slowly, pretending to be surprised. Baba landlord, where your door they go?" The guests snickered. One man in Agbada murmured, "Even tenant no fit, secure him door again?" "Wonders," children began chanting. Open house, like it was a party. Mama Ranty giggled behind her hand. "Maybe fresh air go help landlord too." Pa Yakubu's face turned redder than palm oil stew. His mouth opened, but no sound came. For once, his toothpick fell, and in that moment, surrounded by guests, gossip, and giggles, he finally tasted what he had forced Obina to endure. Public disgrace, nakedness of reputation. And unlike a tenant, a landlord has no one to blame. The heat that day in Ajagunle was unbearable, the kind of heat that made even goats too tired to argue in the streets. The clouds above hung low and dusty, the air sticky with the smell of diesel, sweat, and cooking oil. In compounds like Oduyemi, Saturdays were usually slow and lazy, but not this one. Today something felt different. The compound buzzed like it had swallowed a battery. Neighbors lingered around with brooms they had stopped using. Children abandoned their rubber sandals and turned into barefoot observers. Even the flies seemed more active, as if nature itself knew something was about to happen. And then it did. Pa Yakubu came marching back into the compound, a crate of soft drinks in one hand and a bag of chin-chin in the other. His lips were curled, in that proud half-smile he wore whenever he felt important. The smile faded the moment he turned the corner. There, in the center of the compound, was his door. Not broken, not stolen, just standing tall and out of place. leaned boldly against the community well like it had grown legs and walked out of the wall on its own. And next to it, taped with care and confidence, was the cardboard sign that read in thick black marker, "Door looking for rent, owner too proud to pay." For a moment, everything stopped. The street's breeze fell quiet. The children held their breath. Even the buzzing flies hovered mid-air. The crate dropped with a crash. Bottles clinked violently but didn't shatter. The chin-chin bag hit the ground, sending crumbs across the cement floor like dry confetti. Payakubu's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. His breath came in angry gusts. His eyes darted wildly from the door to the sign to the crowd of confused guests, now whispering among themselves. A few of them were already stifling laughter. Others exchanged knowing glances. But no one offered to help him, not today. "Who? Who did this? Who removed my door?" he roared, voice cracking. But it was too late. The laughter had already begun. The guests he had invited, landlords from other compounds, 2 local councilmen, and even Chief Olorunleka from down the road, stood there witnessing it all. Chief Olorunleka chuckled and nudged the man beside him. "If na me, I no fit do meeting here again, oh? Where dem dey sit inside, lizard fit follow. You talk." The compound kids erupted in laughter. From the corridor, Musa sat chewing chin-chin slowly, nodding like he was watching a fine play. Obina leaned against the doorway of his own room, arms folded, pretending to be mildly confused, but not involved. "Ah, Baba landlord," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You too done taste the fresh air where you say they help person think better?" That line was too much. The corridor exploded. People laughed so hard, some bent over. Mama Ranti dropped her basin and wiped tears from her eyes. Even Jamiu, Payakubu's own son, looked away to hide his giggles. The landlord's chest heaved. This was not a simple prank. This was a wound to his pride. A public dressing down. A man who had built his reputation on being feared and respected was now the laughingstock of his own street. The parlor that once held closed-door meetings now stood wide open. Inside, the mismatched plastic chairs, some cracked, some wobbling, were fully visible. The rug was stained with old palm oil, and the dusty television screen reflected the sad truth. The emperor had no front door. One guest, trying to hide, his smile approached Payakubu and asked, "Baba Yakubu, should we still proceed with the meeting?" The landlord cleared his throat and waved his hand. Yes. Make Una come inside. Little maintenance issue, just small hinge problem." But as the men stepped over the threshold and entered his doorless parlor, the silence was heavier than the heat. No one said it aloud, but everyone thought the same thing. How can a man who cannot secure his own door lead other landlords? Even worse, the boys who played football nearby, unaware or maybe emboldened by the spectacle, kicked their ball into the open parlor mid-meeting. It rolled between the guests' feet, and the 2 boys chasing after it shouted, "Sorry, sir," as they dashed in and out without pause. Someone muttered, "This one na cinema." Another added, "If na my compound, meeting go hold for hotel." From where he sat, Obina kept his gaze down, smiling gently. He didn't gloat. He didn't boast. He simply existed in that moment like a man who had reclaimed his dignity, not by violence, not by insult, but by reflection, both literal and symbolic. His once doorless room now stood with a cloth again, slightly crooked but proudly his. Meanwhile, the mighty landlord had no defense between his sitting room and the entire world. For the rest of the afternoon, Payakubu tried to carry on the meeting. He offered drinks. He read out an agenda written on a folded A4 paper. He tried to laugh at his own jokes, but the damage had been done. His voice lacked its usual thunder. His sentences stumbled. His hands, which once waved commands with confidence, now fidgeted nervously, as if searching for a place to hide. At the end of the meeting, as the guests began leaving in small groups, many shook their heads sympathetically. Some didn't even say goodbye. One of them, a quiet landlord from Ikorodu, looked Pa Yakubu straight in the eye and said, "We all day run compound, but make we no turn ourselves to gods. Tenant no be goat." That sentence was a dagger. It struck the landlord harder than the cardboard sign ever could. When everyone had left and the chairs had been returned to their corner, Pa Yakubu stood alone, sweating despite the cooling breeze. His front door still stood against the well like a silent monument to arrogance. And then, without saying a word, he turned and walked toward Obina's room. Musa looked up first and tapped Obina's arm. Obina sat up, set his spoon down in his half-eaten plate of beans, and stood respectfully. The landlord stopped in front of him. His voice was low, almost human. "Obina," he said. "Yes, sir. Where were you when this nonsense happened?" Obina didn't blink. He smiled politely. "Sir, I dey inside. They patch my curtain. Now so breeze just they blow everything." A laugh echoed from the far end of the corridor. Someone quickly stifled it. Even the goats seemed to pause their chewing. Pa Yakubu stared at Obina for a long moment. Then unexpectedly he sighed. Not in anger, not in fury, but in surrender. "Just try they pay small. No be say we be enemies," he muttered. Obina nodded. "Yes, sir. I understand. No wahala. I go do my best." And just like that, without any announcement, the power shifted. That evening, Jamiu and his brothers quietly reattached Pa Yakubu's door with the same tools that had once humiliated Obina. A few minutes later, without being asked, they fetched Obina's old door from beside the wall and fixed it back too. No crowd gathered this time, no mocking comments. The compound was silent, filled with a new kind of respect, the kind born not out of fear, but out of admiration. And in that quietness, Oduyemi compound changed. No one forgot what happened. Not the guests, not the neighbors, certainly not Pa Yakubu. From that day forward, he still walked around shirtless, still chewed his toothpick like it was his birthright, still boasted about his connections. But he never again removed anyone's door, never again mocked a tenant's poverty, never again used embarrassment as a tool. Because now everyone knew. The market is not for one man alone, and sometimes the loudest lessons are taught with silence. Oduyemi compound would never forget that Saturday. Not because of the landlord's meeting, not because of the heat or the sweet chin-chin served in nylon bags, but because that was the day the story changed. The day when the door that once humiliated a tenant became the very thing that humbled a landlord. Weeks passed. Life in the compound returned to its usual rhythm. The staccato of footsteps down the corridor, the screech of rusted gate hinges, the early morning gossip of women fetching. Water and the echo of children's laughter bouncing off the walls. Yet something was different. Not in the buildings. They still cracked when it rained. Not in the landlord. He still walked shirtless with his round belly leading the way, but in the air, in the way people spoke, in the way they looked at Obina. Now. He wasn't just the tenant who owed rent anymore. He was the man who had endured his own humiliation with quiet strength and returned it, not with violence or insult, but with wisdom sharp enough to cut through pride. People began calling him Bros Obina with more respect. Even Mama Ranty, who used to shout loud judgments about everyone's affairs, now greeted him in a softer tone. "Obina, you go repair my radio this weekend?" she asked one afternoon, smiling like nothing had ever passed between them. "I go try, Mama," he answered, nodding. He didn't gloat. Didn't remind her of the time she stood watching as his room became an exhibit for public ridicule. He had no need to. People remembered. They remembered everything. But the most surprising change came from Pa Yakubu himself. He didn't apologize, not directly. Men like him rarely did, but his actions began to shift. Slowly, subtly. He started lowering his voice when speaking to tenants. He stopped pulling chairs from people's rooms when they owed him. He even fixed the leaking gutter at the back of the compound, something he had ignored for over 2 years. One afternoon, a young man named Kunle, who had just moved in with his wife and baby, came to him nervously. "Baba landlord, I beg, I go pay the 2nd month next week. Pekin just get fever." The old Yakubu would have erupted, but this new one just nodded. "No wahala. Take care of your family first." That moment spread through the compound like dry harmattan fire. Everyone heard. Everyone saw Obinna, sitting in the shade outside his room, just smiled. He knew. Change had come, not by force but by example. There was no speech, no dramatic announcements, just quiet growth, and growth when. Real doesn't need noise. The door that had once leaned outside Obinna's room was now fixed, but it had become more than wood and hinges. It was a symbol of what a man can endure and still walk upright. It reminded the compound and even the landlord that dignity is not owned by the rich or the loud. It belongs to the man who knows when to speak and when to let the silence speak louder. Children stopped teasing Obinna. Instead, they greeted him like an uncle. Sometimes he'd fix their broken toys for free. Sometimes he'd teach them how radios worked, sitting cross-legged with wires and screwdrivers, making their little eyes widen with wonder. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the sky orange, Musa sat beside Obinna on the corridor, sipping sachet water as usual. "You know say, na you be local legend now?" Musa said with a grin. Obinna chuckled. "I beg, leave legend matter." "No, serious," Musa insisted. "People still they talk that day. Even my sister for Bariga hear the gist. She say, that guy get mind-o." Obinna shrugged. "I just do wet and fit help me breathe. Shame no they kill, but silence sometimes they wound deeper." Musa nodded. "Not true. You teach landlord lesson way belt no fit teach." Obinna looked into the distance, watching a group of girls skip rope at the far end of the compound. "I no do am for drama. I do am so say e go pain well, but e no go wound forever. If na violence, e no go change anything. But this one they echo," and he was right. The story echoed beyond the compound. Other landlords came to visit Pa Yakubu in the weeks that followed, not for meetings, but to verify the tale themselves. Some laughed, some offered sympathy, but a few looked at Obinna with eyes full of silent admiration. One even came to him privately. "My name Nasir Dapo. I run compound for Ijesha. I hear say you get brain. My transformer day trip. I go like make you check am." And just like that, Obinna's name began to carry weight, not just in Oduyemi, but outside it. His repair business picked up slowly, not dramatically, but one. Job became 2. 2 became 5. He could finally afford meat in his stew again. Sometimes he even gave Jamiu a bottle of cold malt when he passed by. He still hadn't paid all the rent. But strangely, Payakubu never asked again. One evening, as the landlord stood at the corridor watching the compound in his usual pose, belly in front, hands behind, he turned to Obinna and said, "You dey wise. Na people like you, they make even goat learn." "Respect," Obinna laughed. "Goat no they hear word till them tie am for pole." The landlord grunted. True talk. And they both stood there, not as enemies, not as landlord and tenant, but as men who had learned something the hard way. Months later, someone else in the compound missed their rent. The gossip began again. "Mama Keiji never pay-o." "You know, say Baba landlord go soon, vex." But Obinna said nothing. He just leaned on the corridor wall and watched. The next morning, the woman's door remained untouched, and with that, the lesson was complete. Years from now, Long after Obina had moved on and Pa Yakubu's belly had become legend, the tenants of Oduyemi compound would still remember. They would tell their children and their children's children about the man whose door was removed and how he returned the gesture with quiet power. They would remember not the size of his pocket, but the strength of his silence, and the day a compound learned that dignity has no rent.